Nutcracker and the Mouse King. By ETA Hoffman. Chapter 9? The Story of the Hard Nut. Next evening, as soon as the candles were lighted, Godfather Drosselmeyer made his appearance, and went on with his story as follows. 15 years were Drosselmeyer and the court astronomer on their travels, without coming on a trace of the Nutcracker. Where they wandered far and wide, what strange wonderful things they fell in with, all this I could go on telling you for a month, but will do nothing of the kind. Enough to say that the sore troubled Drosselmeyer was at length seized by a mighty longing for his native place, Nuremberg. With extraordinary violence, this longing one day overpowered him, as he sat in a great wood in Asia, smoking a pipe of tobacco with his friend. "Oh, my beautiful mother city, who never has seen thee is much to pity. Though he travel to London, to Rome, to Bern, after thee his heart must always yearn, after thee, O Nuremberg, town so dear, that hath beautiful houses and windows clear." As Drosselmeyer lifted up his voice so dolefully, the astronomer was moved by deep sympathy, and began to give forth such lamentable howls that they could be heard over a great part of Asia. Then, composing himself, he wiped the tears from his eyes, and asked, "But, my worthy colleague, why do we sit here and cry? Why not go to Nuremberg, since it is all one where and how we search for that fated Nutcracker?" "That's true enough," answered Drosselmeyer, taking comfort. Both at once stood up, knocked the ashes out of their pipes, and went off in a straight line, without stopping, from the wood in the middle of Asia to the city of Nuremberg. Scarcely had they arrived there than Drosselmeyer hastened to his cousin, the doll-maker, varnisher, and gilder, Christopher Zacharias Drosselmeyer, whom he had not seen for many, many years. To him now the clockmaker related the whole history of Princess Pirlipat, of the Lady Mousikins, and of the Nutcracker, so that he struck his hands together, and cried out, full of astonishment, "Ah, cousin, cousin, what a wonderful story!" Drosselmeyer went on to tell of the adventures of his long travel, how he spent 2 years with the Date King, how he was contemptuously turned away by the Prince of Almonds, how he made inquiries in vain of the Natural History Society in Squirrel's Town, in short, how everywhere he had failed to get even a hint about the Nutcracker. During this narration, Christopher Zacharias had kept snapping his fingers, turning about on one foot, clicking with his tongue, then exclaiming, "H.M. H.M. R. A. O. The deuce." Finally he threw his cap and wig up into the air, warmly embraced his kinsman, and cried out, "Cousin, cousin, you are saved, saved you are, I say, for I am much mistaken, if I myself do not possess the Nutcracker." At the same time he pulled out a box from which he drew forth a gilded nut of middling bigness. "See?" he said, showing the nut to his cousin. "This is the state of the case. Years ago a foreigner came to me at Christmas time, with a sack full of nuts which he wanted to sell. Right before my shop, he got into a quarrel, and laid down the sack that he might better defend himself against the nut sellers of the town, who would not allow a stranger to sell nuts here, and attacked him on this account. At that moment a heavily loaded wagon rolled over the sack, and all the nuts were broken except one, which the foreigner, with a queer smile, offered me in exchange for a silver groat of the year 1720. It struck me as singular that I found in my pocket just such a coin as the man wanted, so I bought the nut and gilded it, hardly knowing myself why I paid so dear for the thing and treated it as of such value." All doubt of the cousin's nut being that long sought for one became at once removed, when the astronomer, summoned into council, cleverly scraped away the gilding, and on the rind of the nut found engraved in Chinese characters the word Krakatuk. Great was the joy of the travellers, and the cousin the happiest man under the sun, when Drosselmeyer assured him of his fortune being made, for, besides a good pension, he should henceforth receive gratis all the gold leaf he needed for his gilding. Both the clockmaker and the astronomer had already put on their nightcaps and were going to bed, when the latter, that is, the astronomer, thus began. My beloved colleague, one piece of luck comes not alone. Believe me, we have found not only the Nutcracker, but also the young man who can crack it and restore the princess to her beauty. I mean no one else than the son of your worthy cousin. Nay, I will not sleep, he continued enthusiastically, but this very night will cast the youth's horoscope. Therewith he tore off his nightcap, and at once set about taking observations. The cousin's son was indeed a nice, well-grown young man, who had never yet shaved or worn boots. In his earlier youth, he had acted as a jumping jack for several Christmases, but that was not in the least perceptible, as his father had taken so many pains to educate him and set him straight. At Christmas time he wore a fine red coat laced with gold, a sword, a hat under his arm, and a first-class head of hair gathered into a bag behind. So splendidly adorned, he stood in his father's shop, and out of natural politeness cracked nuts for the young ladies, on which account they called him the handsome little Nutcracker. "It is he!" cried the astronomer, next morning, falling rapturously on the clockmaker's neck. "We have him, he is found. But two things, dearest colleague, must be seen to. In the first place, you must provide your excellent kinsman with a strong wooden head having an under jaw that will stand a good strain. Then, on arriving at the capital, we ought to keep it carefully secret that we have brought along with us the young man to bite open the Nutcracker. He should come on the scene some time later. I read in the horoscope, that the king, after some others have broken their teeth over it to no purpose, will promise the hand of the princess and succession to the kingdom, as reward for whoever can crack this nut and restore Pirlipat's lost beauty." Drosselmeyer's cousin the doll-maker was well content that his youngster should marry the Princess Pirlipat and become a prince and a king, and he left the whole charge of the business to the messengers. The head, which Drosselmeyer fitted onto his hopeful young nephew, turned out very well, so that he made most successful experiments at cracking the hardest peach stones. As soon as Drosselmeyer and the astronomer announced at the palace their arrival with the Nutcracker, the necessary advertisements were at once published, and these travellers being now supplied with the beauty charm, many fine young men, some of them princes, eagerly came forward, trusting in their sound jaws to undertake Pirlipat's disenchantment. The messengers were not a little horrified when they saw the princess again. Her small body, with its shrunken members, could scarcely support the huge unshapely head, while the hideousness of her countenance was enhanced by a white woolly beard that had grown over her mouth and chin. All happened just as the court astronomer had read in the horoscope. One youngster in shoes after another bit away at the Nutcracker till he broke his teeth and jaws, without doing the princess the least good, and as each was then borne away, half fainting, by the dentist kept ready at hand, he would moan out, "That was a hard nut." When now the king, in the anguish of his heart, promised daughter and kingdom to whoever would perform the disenchantment, there presented himself that pretty lad from Nuremberg, and modestly begged permission to make a trial. None of the candidates had pleased the princess so much as young Drosselmeyer. She laid her little hand on her heart and sighed deeply. "Ah, if it were he who should bite open the Nutcracker and become my husband." After most civilly saluting the king and queen, and also the princess, Pirlipat, young Drosselmeyer took the Nutcracker from the chief master of ceremonies, put it between his teeth, worked his head powerfully, and crack crack. The shell broke into several bits. Dexterously picking from the kernel the rough fibers about it, he handed it to the princess with a respectful scrape off his foot, then closed his eyes and began to step backward. The princess at once swallowed the nut and, oh wonder! The deformity was gone, and there in its place stood an angelic figure, the face dimpled rosy and lily-white, the eyes of shining blue, the long locks curled like threads of gold. Music of trumpets and kettle drums swelled the loud exultation of the people. The king and his whole court danced on one leg as at Pirlipat's birth. And the queen had to be treated with eau de cologne, having fainted away in her transports of joy. young Drosselmeer, who had still the 7 steps backwards to accomplish, was not a little flustered by this great tumult, yet he kept his balance, and stood raising his right foot for the last step, when Lady Mousekins, squeaking and squealing shrilly, ran out of the floor, so that in the act of setting down his foot, he trampled upon her, which made him stumble, and he had almost fallen. Oh, mishap! Suddenly was the youth become as deformed an object as Princess Pirlipat before. His body had shrunk up, and could scarcely bear the weight of the big unshapely head with great eyes staring out of it, and broad, horribly gaping mouth. Instead of his fine bunch of hair, there hung behind him a kind of narrow wooden cloak with which his lower jaw was worked. Clockmaker and astronomer stood beside themselves for dread and amazement, yet they saw how Lady Mousekins rolled all bleeding on the floor. Her ill nature had not gone unpunished, for, with the sharp heel of his shoe, young Drosselmeer had trodden so hard on her neck that she must die. And, writhing in her death agony, she squeaked and squawked pitiably, "Oh, Crackatuck, hard nut that proves my end. Ah, Nutcracker, thy hour is now at hand. He. Woe's me! But also woe to thee. My son, the Mouse King with the 7 crowns, will soon avenge his murdered mother's wrongs on thee, thou ugly, spoiled, conceited doll. Oh, life so fair and bright, from which I fall to shades of gloomy death, I fail for breath. My last I speak. O. Ah. A. Squeak. With this cry expired Lady Mousekins and was carried out by the royal fire-mender. Hitherto no one had thought of young Drosselmeer, but now Pirlipat reminded the king of his promise, and at once he ordered the hero of the day to be brought forward. But when the unfortunate fellow showed himself in all his deformity, the princess held both hands before her eyes, crying, "Away, away with the hideous Nutcracker." Forthwith the High Marshal seized him by his narrow shoulders and threw him out at the door. The king, full of rage that a Nutcracker should be forced upon him as son-in-law, put all the blame on the clockmaker and the astronomer, and banished them forever from his capital. That had not appeared in the horoscope which the astronomer cast at Nuremberg, but he did not fail to make fresh observations, and now read in the stars that young Drosselmeer might take heart in his new condition, for, in spite of his deformity, he should yet become a prince and a king. His unshapeliness, however, could disappear only when the 7-headed heir of Lady Mousekins, whom she had borne after the death of her 7 elder sons, should have been slain by his hand, and when a lady had fallen in love with him, deformed as he was. You must have actually seen young Drosselmeer about Christmas time in his father's shop at Nuremberg, a Nutcracker, it is true, but also a prince in disguise. There, children, is the story of the hard nut, and now you know why people so often say that was a hard nut to crack. And how it comes that nutcrackers are so ugly. So ended the counsellor's tale. Mary thought that Princess Pirlipat was an ill-natured, ungrateful thing, but Fred assured her that if Nutcracker were a brave fellow, he would easily do for the Mouse King, and soon regain his former lovely appearance. Thank you for watching. If you would like to support the channel, please like and subscribe.